Chapman, and I'm here on Saturday, June 17th, 2017 with Yana Vishnitsky in her home. So do you want to first talk about growing up in Russia and what was that like?
It's quite a large question, and growing up in Russia, we were young and healthy, and it was okay. We didn't know how bad it was until we came to the United States.
And just comparing the two.
Comparing the two. We knew that something is not right with the system. I'll tell you a couple of funny stories. They're not really funny, but they're sad. But you know, if you had an orange, you were afraid to put the peels, orange peels, in your dumpster.
Really, why?
You put the orange peel in the neighbor's dumpster.
Really? Why?
Because if you are honest, work on salary, there is no way you will be able to afford an orange.
Wow. How much did they just not make any money?
Well, they made money, they lived a life there. My dad was a criminal attorney.
Oh, wow.
A very desirable attorney.
Nice. What kind of education did you have?
This is my dad.
There?
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow. What happened to his leg?
It was amputated during the war.
Oh, wow. Did he fight in?
He didn't have a chance. He lost his leg in the first month.
Oh, wow. Which war was it?
World War II.
Oh, okay.
And he was 20 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, but not having a leg didn't stop him. He was an adventurer.
That's incredible.
Guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he was an attorney and then
He was a criminal attorney.
Awesome. And what did your mom do?
My mom was an attorney too.
Awesome. Very law.
Yes.
Good family. So what kind of education did you have growing up?
My dad was very education directed. Everything with him was about education. So, and the dynamic of the family are different in America than in Russia.
Sure.
Your dad will not be able to tell you, go to this school or go to that school. You will consult with him, but he will not take the liberty to tell you, Rebecca, you have to go to CU, and you're not going anywhere else. In Russia, it's different. In Russia, parents decide pretty much for you. And it was one of the symptomatology, I believe, of not a healthy nation, because parents dictate your life and you don't have choices.
So you were told where to go to school and what to
Yeah,
study?
my dad kind of figured it out that I was equally capable in math and in literature. So he said, he figured out if I become an engineer, having the language capacity, I will be more sellable. And of course I was Jewish, which complicated things because there are quotas that existed at the time when I went to school.
What did that entail?
That only certain percentage of Jews can be allowed.
Oh. So were you able to go to school still?
Yes.
But some of your friends weren't?
Yes.
Wow. Huh. So let's talk more about what it was like being Jewish in Russia.
You carried a passport, and in the passport they were calling it the fifth paragraph. The first was your name and last name, first and last. when you were born, where you were born, and then nationality. And nationality was Jewish, though it's not a nationality actually, but it was the fifth, they call it the fifth paragraph interferes with your life. People change their names. If husband or wife was not Jewish, they took the non-Jewish name of the family. I had my personal experience when I moved to St. Petersburg. Looking for a job, I was overqualified, but I could not find a job because they asked for the passport. And then they stopped being interested.
Wow. That's awful.
Yeah.
Do your levels of education apply in the United States, or how did that carry out?
It doesn't apply.
It doesn't.
No,
So-
it doesn't apply. First of all, I didn't want to be an engineer, and I always hated it. And but I didn't know what I want to be. So when I came here, it was an opportunity to get restarted.
So did you go back to school when you came here?
They took all of my degrees. It was master's in engineering, and bachelor's in science. They took all of it, put it all in one bucket, and gave me, and I went to school to CSU for 2 years and got my second bachelor's degree in social work.
Oh, wow.
And then I was able to go to Smith and finish Smith in 15 months
Wow. What did
and
you
got a
study?
master's in social work,
Okay.
clinical psychology.
And then, so did you come directly to Colorado when you immigrated here?
Yes.
Okay.
I came directly to Colorado because my husband's uncle lived here. He came here because he survived the siege of Leningrad during World War II and had compromised lungs. And because of National Jewish Health, he was resettled by JFS here. And it was the only place where we had relatives, so we came here. I came the first one, he came the first one, I guess. And then me and my son, who was 4.
Wow, your son was 4 when he came here?
Yes,
Do you think it was hard for him to acclimate
very. But easier than for
for
me.
you? What was it like?
I was
coming here?
31.
Oh, wow. And did you know English?
Yes,
Okay.
I spoke English, and this is where I always thank my dad, because he pushed me to study the language. I was fluent in English.
That's good. So did that make it easier?
That made it easier. I was speaking about it yesterday, but not enough to build a successful career.
Sure. So what would you say were like some of the biggest barriers in acclimating?
When you come to this country, many choices and lack of familiarity with everyday life.
Sure.
Go to the grocery store, you feel a complete idiot, you don't know anything. And being an adult, it's very hard. Being an adult, you feel like you are stripped of basic intelligence.
Just because it was so different from
It was
Russia to here?
Yes.
Wow. What was it? What were like the first steps that you took when you came here?
The first, we landed in Denver, and I was shocked how different the landscape looks and where all the people were, and people who we encountered were smiling and very polite, didn't want to know how you are, but they had this standard question, how are you?
Right.
And that was irritating because you figure out they don't really care how you are. It took me some time to understand that it's better to smile and ask how you are, not being interested, than be grouchy and rude and still not care how you are.
Absolutely.
So, but it took some time. It's a different, very significant difference in
Yeah.
culture.
What were like some of the governmental differences that struck you the most? Like clearly there are innumerable differences.
Well, in Russia, living in a family of a criminal attorney, there is a presumption until you're proven to be guilty, there is a presumption that you're innocent. Here, it's a different story.
That's interesting.
And that was striking to me. Then you have to prove your innocence.
Sure. Huh, that's very interesting. Wow. What about what were the first things that happened when you came here? Where did you go? So you landed in Denver.
And my husband's uncle rented us an apartment on 13th and Washington, which was weird. It was a very weird neighborhood.
Yeah. And then did your son start going to school immediately after you came here?
Yes, he started. I was terrified about which school.
Yeah. How did you make that
Because-
decision?
Private school, he went to Herzl. Because it was Jewish and small and, like it felt to me like it would be a guarantee against drugs.
Yeah.
Because we were scared.
Yeah.
And we couldn't, we couldn't know. We hear and speculate the rest.
Yeah. Would you say that the reality of coming here was very different than what you expected it to be?
Yes.
What did you expect that didn't hold true?
I imagined the cities are like Las Vegas, full of life, full of energy, full of action.
Sure.
And I found a sleepy town.
That's interesting. What were your first few years here like? Was it hard?
It was very hard because you, from a competent adult woman, you turn into an incompetent, it's like a young child. You need to start making first little steps. You feel unsafe, incompetent,
What were the things
lost.
what were the things that made you feel incompetent, that made you feel?
Not knowing how to help my son choose things that he needed to choose in school. And I spoke the language.
Okay. Did
But
he also speak English?
No, but he was learning how to speak,
Okay.
period.
That makes sense. So throughout your son's whole educational like path, how did you prioritize his success and lead him to ultimately be so successful, do you think?
It was a generational. My dad believed in education, and I internalized his belief. So one of the very important things for me was to give him good education. I was 31 years old, so I cannot tell you that I thought only about his life. I thought about my life too. But his education was very important to me. So he went to good schools. He was a very exceptional student. He went to Northwestern, and then the University of Chicago.
It's really impressive, wow.
For business. Very bright, but was very bored through school, not challenged enough. And I didn't know what to do, and did not help him get into more sophisticated classes or in stronger academics, special schools. I didn't know, charter schools. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And you act upon what you know.
Right.
If you know, you don't even know what to look for.
Exactly. Interesting. What would you say led you to have economic and social success in the United States? Like ultimately, I know it was hard at first, but like what was the turning point that led you to be successful?
I believed that my education and my knowledge of the language put me in a better position compared to other refugees. So I felt an enormous responsibility to educate Americans about refugees, refugees about Americans, because there are a lot of misconceptions.
Sure.
So I did that, did a lot of speaking, telling that refugees are the same as you, and make our country richer in a lot of ways.
So were you surrounded with other refugees, or were you mostly interacting with Americans?
It's an interesting question. Immigration, a very difficult journey. You lose. I couldn't surround myself with refugees because I was working in a quote-unquote authority job,
Was that JFS?
JFS.
Okay. So that was your first and only job, and you just continued it for a while?
Yes, 38 years for a while.
That's incredible.
Yes.
And do you think your experience immigrating here was the motivation to have that job?
Yes, I wanted, everybody's preoccupied with self-sufficiency of the refugees. I started pointing out you can't be self-sufficient if you're depressed. And you can not be not depressed because you go through major loss. Even if the country where you were miserable, but it is your country, and it's your language, it's your food, it's your everything. And you at age 31, you become completely incompetent, cannot make choices, lose the familiarity, lose your friends, lose your very often family. Not know when I left, I didn't know whether I will see my parents again. So
what was it like leaving all that behind?
traumatic.
Yeah.
Traumatic, and nobody talked about that. So I started talking about mental health, and I think that was where the direction I picked. I felt if I am educated in that area, I will be able to have more impact.
Right. So what was the immigration process that you went through, and like the process of leaving everything behind and picking up new?
I applied for immigration, was labeled a traitor right away, lost the job.
How long were you in Russia between the time that you applied and when you...
21 days.
Oh, so it was relatively quickly.
Yeah, and I didn't know, you never know how long will it take. So,
At that time, were most people who applied for immigration able to leave?
no, many people were refused and they got stuck for years.
Did you know people who that happened to?
Yes. Yes.
So what was your like primary motivation to leave?
To tell you the truth, my dad was pushing
Really?
for a better future. He was pushing us to leave, me and my brother, who was 13 years younger than I am. My dad was afraid of the army
In Russia?
in Russia. The Jewish kids very often didn't return.
Really? What was the dynamic there?
They were killed.
Just for
By
being
Russians.
Jewish?
Yes.
Really? That's scary. So you're kind of living in a constant state of fear.
So you do what you can to avoid the army.
Right.
And my dad felt that immigration will be a good solution. My brother and my mom came later, and they didn't know whether they will be allowed. You never know when you apply, you never know.
Right.
So my mom and dad had to divorce,
And your dad stayed there?
and my dad kept a job, and my mom left with my brother, and then dad applied and was refused for some time, but eventually he left.
So were they forced to have a divorce so that your mom could leave before your dad?
Yes, that my dad didn't lose a job and was able to sustain the livelihood.
Okay.
Well, my mom was in the process of leaving.
Interesting. Wow.
And the fact that I got 21 day, I didn't know. In 21 day, I had to get rid of the apartment, furniture. I couldn't take anything with me. Everything that I owned.
Really?
Yes.
And did you come by plane?
Yes.
Wow, so when you came here, you literally had nothing?
$150.
Wow. So what did you do with that like led you to be able to build a life?
People were kind. I had very nice couple of volunteers who introduced me to appropriate retail stores, food, who knew that I am like a baby.
So was that through JFS, your experience?
Yes. That's why JFS became so important to me.
Sure.
I'm trying to find the speech yesterday that I gave. I will give it to you. A little bit, you will have a glimpse into the life of a refugee. There was a woman at 31 years old, felt incompetent, scared, unable to provide a safe environment for her young son. I was terrified of the drugs and didn't know what to do. My son is 42 and I still feel guilty for not having given him whatever. Immigration is a difficult and painful journey. I think it will be helpful for you to read.
Being honored as as a refugee for my work helping other refugees is the most meaningful honor of my life. I've been there. I know what it's like to give up everything you know for the chance of a better and safer life. That's why I'm so passionate about the plight of refugees in our state. I want to share with you how it felt to be an adult woman arriving in a foreign country with nothing, feeling helpless, lost, and disenfranchised. I was a woman who was a professional in her native country and who gave up everything she knew to start a new life. I traveled with a husband and a 4-year-old son. My husband suffered from depression, which is not uncommon in men who have more difficult immigration experiences. My only advantage over other refugees was the fact that I spoke English, which is a lot, but not enough to build a successful career. I was a woman who at 31 years old felt incompetent, scared, and unable to provide a safe environment for her young son. My son is 42 and I still feel guilty. It might seem inconsequential at this point, but I can still taste the pain and frustration of not being able to give my kid what other parents were able to do. Immigration is a difficult and painful journey, and many of you have made the same journey. A journey full of losses, loss of culture, loss of language, loss of friends and very often family, loss of status, and most important, loss of identity. And a journey full of hopes that sometimes do not come through. I never realized that connectedness and belonging was something that I longed for. I could not be a part of the Russian community because I was employed in a position in which I represented an authority figure. I tried different outlets to become a part of the Denver community, from business networking groups to synagogue to trying to build a social life. Nothing clicked for me except Jewish Family Service, the very agency that resettled me. JFS gave me an identity. It was a place that became home, a place where I belonged. For 38 years, I became synonymous with JFS. I was my life's work, my passion, my identity. JFS gave me a special opportunity to help others. I went to work, first as a translator to Russian refugees coming to Colorado, and later leading the agency's resettlement efforts. This work resonated deeply with my belief system, with my compassion for the underdog, and my desire to make one life and the life of the entire community better. It was a very ambitious goal. I was in a unique position to observe gaps in service firsthand. Everyone was preoccupied with self-sufficiency. Refugee mental health was not on anybody's agenda. Until I met Paul Stein. He also believed in the importance of addressing mental health issues for people who have undergone major losses and often trauma in their lives. That was one of the reasons why I chose to become a psychotherapist and started a refugee mental health program that was the first in the nation. I believe that I have a responsibility to help refugees who could not express their needs, and I believed that I had the responsibility to educate the American community that refugees make our community a richer place. Refugees are intelligent, honorable people who have been displaced and who are struggling. It became my mission to ease some of the pain and help the people succeed. Being a refugee myself, I understood the monumental loss so many of us experienced in coming to this country. You sacrifice so much for the hope of a better life. It's a lot of sacrifice, and it doesn't always work out for the better. In the end, coming to America was the most important and the best decision of my life. I was able to succeed only because someone helped me. That's what so many of these people in this room do every day. You help refugees succeed in their new home and become part of the community. I admire and applaud you. So you talk about how you feel guilty for not being able to support your son. How was it being an immigrant parent surrounded by American parents who knew more than you?
My son was a good kid. Mm-hmm. If he would not have been a good kid, I had to rely on him because I have never gone through education, so I didn't know the parents-teachers conferences. He wrote his own notes if he was late for school, I had no idea.
Sure.
And it makes you feel powerless.
Right. So were you able to develop relationships with other parents still, or was that hard?
It was hard. I was different.
Right.
My son came home one day and he said, "Mom, can I change my name?" He wanted to be David. And he wanted to be David only on the street where we lived. I said, "Why?" Because in school they knew how smart he is.
What's his name?
Vitaly.
Okay.
So they knew how smart he is, so he felt, like up.
Right. And did he go by David?
No,
No. Didn't like that idea.
no. But
Interesting.
it was Vitaly. He says, "Mom, it's such an unusual name. People will know that I am a foreigner."
Right.
So in school it didn't matter because he was very smart and smarter than other kids.
Interesting. You talk a lot in your speech about identity and like how you lost your identity. How did you would you say your identity totally changed once you came to the United States?
You become nobody.
And how did you find somebody to become?
It's an interesting question. I think JFS was very helpful because I was put in a position where I could develop my skills that I didn't even know that I have, because in Russia they don't promote creativity, independence.
Right.
They try to keep you dependent, not creative. So here I developed a new appreciation for myself.
That's great.
And I surrounded myself by American friends
Right.
who were instrumental. I was talking about it yesterday. You need to have somebody who will invest their time
Right.
and who will invest their effort to help you out.
And how did you find those people?
Through Jewish Family Service.
So were there any attempts to like find a different community before you found JFS, or was it you immediately found
No.
JFS?
I was hired 2 months after I
Oh
arrived
wow. How? Just because you were working with them and they?
because I spoke the language.
Okay. So what do you think, hypothetically, I know this is a very hypothetical question, but what do you think the differences would be if you didn't speak English? Like, you think your life would have been entirely
Different. I couldn't get an education and I couldn't.
So were you working and going to school for like the first few years?
Yes,
Okay. How was that?
difficult. Because I was a single mother by that time. My husband couldn't find a job in Denver, and when Vitaly was about 11 years old, his father left to Rochester, New York for a job. And I was raising Vitaly and going to school by myself.
Wow. So when you were in Russia, did you feel like a part of the community despite the hardships that you faced?
You have family and you have friends. You don't need a community.
So like that you developed, that was the
Yes.
community that you
Yeah.
developed. And then once you came to the United States, what was it like making the shift from like that community to the other?
I was drawn to people who are psychologically sophisticated. And that kind of helped me direct my energy to become psychologically, because there is nothing in Russia that is, at the time when I was living there was no psychology, or none of my friends knew. Were sophisticated psychologically, and I started looking for friends who I can learn from.
And you didn't have that in Russia? What do you attribute that to? Like the lack of it?
Well, I think the interest to keep people ignorant.
Like that was precipitated by the government, would you say?
Well, there was no psychology. I don't know why. I think because there was a stigma. And mental health was used to arrest people and to lock them up.
Interesting.
And that's why, none of the psychiatric illnesses were treated because they were hidden.
Wow, interesting. What, you definitely don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. I know it's like getting into political territory, but based on your experiences, what do you think about like the current immigration situation?
I feel it is directed. If we had the same situation 39 years ago, my parents would not have been able to come.
Really?
And the family would have been split up, and that would be tragic. So that's because we didn't all come together. We came. I was the first one, then my grandma came, then my mom with my brother came, and the last one was my dad. So it would have not happened with the current immigration policy.
What's your biggest piece of advice to like have the same level of success that you had?
Be open-minded. Don't be afraid to make judgments about the culture here. It's not all wonderful. It has its own problems. So a lot of immigrants are afraid to embrace American culture because they look at it as betrayal of their own culture. But the best of both worlds, take the best out of this culture and the best out of their culture and blend it together. And that is the successful acculturation.
Sure. So speaking of culture, like, what are some of like cultural traditions that you continue still in the United States, and what did you leave behind?
Well, some holidays I left behind. Like an interesting example, we had one of the widely celebrated holidays, New Year's Eve, because it was the only non-political holiday.
Right.
When I came here, I couldn't celebrate because I couldn't put a tree, being Jewish.
Interesting.
And it was very sad for me to leave it behind because in my culture it was something new, fresh, new year, new hopes, new excitement. And here it was a religious symbol.
Like your Christmas tree?
Right.
Okay.
I even brought decorations
Really?
that I had to put on the trash because the rabbis were saying it's confusing for Vitaly. He goes to Jewish school and having a tree in the house, will be not okay and it will be confusing.
Right. Huh. Wow.
Well, we continue Jewish traditions, Passover, Yom Kippur. This is what we maintain.
Right. Would you say that in general, did you grow up Jewish? Or not Jewish, but celebrate?
Was I able to celebrate the holiday? I was able to celebrate. I didn't know what I'm celebrating.
Interesting. And why was that? You were just never taught?
Never taught.
Okay.
You know, we grew up with this saying, religion is the opium for the masses.
Interesting. So what do you say, like, do you think there's some importance in, like, if you're an immigrant, continuing on some of your traditions, or do you think?
I think we are more of an exception than a rule, because traditions were not kept up in Russia, Jewish tradition. You know, there was no place to get matzah.
Really?
You couldn't go to a synagogue, because if my dad would have been noticed in a synagogue, he would have lost his job.
Really? Wow.
So it was few households that could practice, and mine was in secret, one of them.
Wow. That's interesting. Thank you so much. That's such an incredible story. Wow.